The Vescathi homeworld had once been a calm and beautiful place. Their people lived in wide crystal cities that shone beneath a soft blue sky. Their oceans were gentle, their winds light, and their forests filled with glowing plants that shimmered like tiny stars. Life had always moved slowly, peacefully, without many dangers. The Vescathi had grown used to that calm. They had built their culture around it, believing the universe was mostly gentle too. But the universe had other plans. Everything changed when their star began to weaken. At first it flickered, just small shifts of light that most Vescathi didn't even notice. Scientists saw it early, of course, but even they weren't worried. Stars flickered sometimes. It wasn't unusual. It would pass. Except at DIDN single quotes T dot within a few years, the flicker became a strange dimming. Then came strange bursts of radiation, short at first, but growing longer with each passing cycle. And then the storms began, storms that ripped through atmospheres, storms that turned whole regions unlivable overnight. The Vescathi had never known anything like this. Their people had never prepared for disaster. They had no special suits to protect against radiation. They had no machinery meant for harsh weather. They didn't even have real military ships, only research vessels and small patrol craft. Their society had always been peaceful and delicate, built on the belief that the universe was kind. So when the universe showed its teeth, they were almost helpless. At first, their leaders tried to calm the population. They broadcast gentle messages telling people to stay indoors during radiation storms. They closed some cities and moved citizens to safer regions. But the storms didn't stop. The star kept getting worse. And other planets in their system colonies, built over generations, were now being swept by waves of radiation that shattered buildings like glass. The Vescathi were terrified. They couldn't stop the star. They couldn't protect their people. And worst of all, they couldn't escape. Their ships were not built for long-distance travel. They could visit their own moons and colonies, but they couldn't flee to another system. That kind of travel belonged to advanced civilizations far stronger than theirs. So the Vescathi Council made a choice that many thought desperate. They sent out a universal plea. They gathered every ship, every scientist, every communicator, and every working satellite. They crafted a message in dozens of languages, using symbols, mathematics, sound, and light patterns. They repeated it endlessly, embedding it with location markings, medical warnings, and recordings of their dying worlds. The message said, very simply, our star is failing. Our people cannot survive. Please help us, anyone, please. They sent it again and again, into every direction of the galaxy. Then they waited. Days passed, nothing. Weeks passed, still nothing. Months passed, not a single reply. At first, the Vescathi were shocked. They believed the galaxy was full of friendly, advanced species. They believed anyone would answer. But slowly, a cold truth settled in. The other civilizations had heard their message and chosen not to get involved. The Vescathi weren't a powerful empire. They had no resources worth stealing, no territory worth claiming, and no army worth allying with. Helping them offered no reward. Getting involved could even bring danger, since their dying star threatened any ship that came too close. So one by one, the more advanced civilizations in nearby space turned away. They closed their borders. They blocked Vescathi signals. Some even pretended they never heard the plea. The Vescathi Council fell into despair. Their people grew restless. Many felt abandoned by the universe. Families moved into underground shelters, crowding into spaces built only for temporary emergencies. Supplies began to run low. Hospitals overflowed with radiation sickness. Entire cities near the star-facing hemisphere had to be evacuated. The nights grew darker and colder as the star's light weakened. Many stared at the sky with fear, wondering if the next radiation storm would be the one that broke their last shield generator. Hope became a rare thing. Still, the council kept broadcasting the message. Even when the equipment began to fail, even when their communicators started sparking from radiation damage, even when they doubted anyone would ever respond, they kept sending it. Because what else could they do? On the 53rd day, after the largest radiation storm in their history, a small group of Vescathi technicians sat around a flickering console inside the main communication tower. They had barely eaten. They hadn't slept properly in days. They were repairing wires and resetting damaged systems for the 100th time. One technician, exhausted and frustrated, muttered that they should just turn the broadcast off. No one was listening. No one cared. Another quietly said that maybe the universe simply didn't want them anymore. Their supervisor didn't say anything. He only stared at the dimmed screen, wondering if he should call the council and tell them what everyone was already thinking, that maybe it was time to accept their fate. Then, just as one of the technicians reached to shut down the radio tower, the console beeped. At first they didn't react. Machines beeped all the time when radiation scrambled something. They assumed it was just another glitch. But then the beep repeated long tone. Short tone, long tone patterns that were too steady and too clean to be random. One of the younger technicians frowned and tapped the zing. SCREENA, new symbol appeared. An unknown. Signal. Not VSKI. Not local. Not one of their colonies. Something from very, very far away. The room, once filled with tired frustration, suddenly went silent. No one moved. No one even breathed. The supervisor leaned in and pressed the main receiver control with hands that shook. A moment later, the signal became clear, structured, organized, and definitely artificial. Someone out there had heard them. Someone was answering. But the reply wasn't like the smooth signals from advanced civilizations the Vescathi admired. This one was rough, powerful, almost aggressive in its precision. It carried a strength that felt unfamiliar, a tone that felt wild somehow. Unrefined, yet confident, the technicians exchanged confused looks. They had never seen a signal built like this. It didn't match any nearby species. Technology. The supervisor ran a decoder. More lines appeared. The reply carried a short message, repeated again and again as the signal drilled across space. The words were simple. We received your call. Sending help. Hold on. For a long moment, no one in the tower spoke. They just stared at the screen, at the simple message that had arrived like a sudden spark in the dark. One technician whispered, "Who is it?" Another said softly, "Does it matter?" Someone answered. The Vescathi didn't know it yet. They didn't know the kind of species that had intercepted their desperate call. They didn't know the reputation of the planet that sent the reply. They didn't know how strange and strong their new allies were. All they knew was that they were no longer alone. The message repeated again. The same words each time, firm and steady, like a promise from across the galaxy. We received your call. Sending help. Hold on. It was only later, many cycles later, when scientists traced the signal's origin, that they learned where it came from. A small, overlooked blue planet on the edge of a minor star system. A world many in the galaxy avoided. A world known by a whispered name. Deathworld. A place called Earth. And with that realization came a mix of relief and fear, because no one knew what to expect from a Deathworld species. Stories said they were stubborn, unpredictable, and capable of surviving dangers most species couldn't even imagine. But in that moment, none of that mattered to the Vescathi. When the universe turned its back on them, the Deathworlders didn't. Someone had listened. Someone was coming. And for the first time in many years, the Vescathi dared to believe that maybe, just maybe, they had a chance to survive. When the Vescathi first saw the signal from Earth, no one knew exactly what to expect. The message was simple and clear, but it carried a strange energy, almost like the people behind it were alive in a way the Vescathi had never experienced. The technicians stared at the screen, trying to understand who or what could respond so quickly and confidently. A small voice in their heads whispered fear. They had been abandoned by the galaxy so many times that trust came hard now. Meanwhile, on the planet Earth, a different story was unfolding. Far from the Vescathi system, humans had already noticed the signal. Scientists and explorers in orbiting stations were studying strange transmissions from deep space when the Vescathi message appeared. At first, they weren't sure what it meant. The signal was unusual, packed with patterns and data unlike anything humans had received before. It was chaotic and precise at the same time, like the sound of a storm being translated into numbers. And it carried something else: urgency, desperation, a plea that humans could almost feel in their bones. Humans didn't hesitate. Where other civilizations might have ignored the signal, Earth species acted. They were known across the galaxy, in whispers and reports, as Deathworlders. Humans had survived natural disasters, pandemics, wars, and countless dangers that would have wiped out weaker species. They were not the strongest in technology compared to the elite civilizations, nor the richest in resources. But they had something rare: resilience, creativity, and an instinct to act when others would only observe. Within hours, Earth's leaders convened a council, gathering scientists, engineers, medics, and explorers. Every department of spacefaring knowledge that humans had was summoned. They analyzed the Vescathi signal, running simulations to understand the star's instability and the damage already inflicted on the planet and its colonies. The message was dire: entire cities had been evacuated, colonies were collapsing, and radiation storms had made large regions uninhabitable. In short, if no one acted, the Vescathi species would not survive. It was not just a mission. It became a question of moral instinct. Humans did not calculate risk in the same way as most galactic empires. They did not wait for permission or for a guaranteed reward. They responded because someone needed them. Someone had asked for help, and that was enough. Preparations were intense but methodical. Ships were readied, supplies packed, and teams trained for environmental extremes, far beyond anything humans had faced on their own planet. The humans knew that Vescathi space was dangerous. Radiation levels were extreme. Storms could tear apart even the sturdiest vessel. But humans had experience with harsh planets, blistering deserts, freezing tundras, acid rains, massive hurricanes. Every environment had taught them adaptability and endurance. On Earth, the selection of the team was careful. It included engineers who could improvise machinery under impossible conditions, medics trained in extreme biochemistry, and explorers who had survived the most dangerous environments their home planet had to offer. They didn't choose the strongest or the bravest. They chose the most adaptable. They needed people who could think fast, act decisively, and endure the unpredictable. The day of departure was tense. The ships lifted from the Earth's surface with quiet determination. Families, friends, and colleagues watched silently, aware that this was not a simple exploration mission. Humans were venturing into a region where a star was dying, into chaos the galaxy had avoided. And they were going there not for profit, not for glory, but purely to help a species that had been abandoned. The journey through space was long, but the humans never wavered. They passed through asteroid belts, dodged solar flares, and navigated the void where few dared to travel. During the journey, the crew trained constantly, testing suits against radiation leaks, running simulations for disaster scenarios, and learning the data sent from the Vescathi colonies. Each member of the crew carried a quiet determination. They were aware of the risk, but the thought of leaving a species to die when help was possible, was unbearable. When they finally approached the Vescathi system, the first images hit the crew with a shocking reality. From orbit, the Vescathi planets looked like they were burning slowly. The surface had been scarred by storms, with cities half destroyed and colonies abandoned. Radiation spikes created glowing streaks across the atmosphere, painting the world in dangerous, otherworldly colors. The humans were reminded that the universe was not kind to the fragile. Yet the Vescathi had survived this long. Against impossible odds, the species had held on, using ingenuity and courage to resist the star's wrath as long as they could. The Vescathi. People watched the approaching ships in awe. Humans moved differently from what the Vescathi expected. Their ships were smaller than most galactic vessels, but heavily armored and packed with equipment that seemed almost alien. The humans moved with purpose, their gestures confident, almost reckless. For the Vescathi, it was the first time they had seen a species approach danger instead of fleeing from it. It was terrifying and inspiring at the same time. When the humans landed on one of the outer colonies, the Vescathi did not know whether to be cautious or grateful. Humans disembarked in suits designed to withstand the planet's radiation storms, carrying tools, machines, and supplies unlike anything the Vescathi had seen. Yet they spoke softly, offering reassurance with gestures and primitive universal translators. Their presence was both strange and comforting. The Vescathi soon realized that these humans thrived where other species would have perished. They could work under radiation, improvise machinery in dangerous storms, and endure environments that had crippled the Vescathi. And despite this, they did not act superior or claim control. They simply worked, solving problems with a mix of courage, skill, and stubborn determination. As the humans assessed the damage to the colonies, they quickly prioritized the most urgent needs, stabilizing habitats, repairing energy shields, and ensuring that radiation levels in shelters were survivable. Engineers worked side by side with Vescathi technicians, teaching them new techniques, adapting human technology to Vescathi materials, and improvising machines that could survive both the storms and the failing star. Medics treated the injured, not just with advanced medicine, but with practical solutions, makeshift protective suits, portable filtration units, and rapid emergency triage that saved hundreds of lives in the first hours alone. What struck the Vescathi most was not the human skill, but their mindset. Humans did not ask why this species deserved help, nor did they wait for the star to be fully understood before acting. They simply saw suffering and decided to fight it. For the first time in decades, the Vescathi felt hope. The first night of human presence was quiet. The Vescathi watched from a distance as the humans set up temporary shelters, worked through the storms, and prepared systems for the long battle ahead. Fires glowed in the distance, machines hummed, and the atmosphere was filled with a sense of relentless energy. These were beings who would not rest, who would not hesitate, who would not leave until their mission was done. By dawn, the Vescathi began to believe it might be possible to survive. And though they did not yet know what the future held, they understood one undeniable truth. In a galaxy that had ignored them, humans had answered. They had come when no one else would. They had arrived not as rulers, not as conquerors, but as helpers, willing to face danger head-on simply because someone needed them. For the humans, it was only the beginning. The work ahead was massive. The star's decay would not wait, and the Vescathi system was far from stable. But humans thrived on challenges like these. Where the Vescathi had seen fear, humans saw opportunity. Where the Vescathi had prepared for collapse, humans prepared for survival. And most importantly, humans did not see helpless victims. They saw people worth saving. And they would not give up. In those first hours together, the Vescathi began to learn about humans, not through words, but through action. Humans laughed even while exhausted, made mistakes but corrected them quickly, shared food and water, and insisted on working together with the local population rather than taking control. Their bravery was paired with humility, their power with patience, and their determination with empathy. By the end of the first cycle, humans had stabilized several critical colonies, repaired essential machinery, and trained Vescathi technicians to handle emergencies independently. They had given not just hope, but tools, knowledge, and a renewed sense of strength. And though the stars still burned dangerously, and though the universe still seemed indifferent, the Vescathi now believed that survival was possible. Humans had arrived from the edge of the galaxy and changed everything, not with weapons or domination, but with courage, skill, and relentless compassion. They had shown the Vescathi what it meant to fight when the odds were impossible. And in doing so, they had begun to reshape not just the fate of a species, but the Vescathi's understanding of what the universe could be. And somewhere deep in the human ships, no one celebrated or rested. They were already planning the next step, because saving a species was not a one-time effort, it was a promise. And humans were never known to break a promise. The humans had been in the Vescathi system for several cycles now. And slowly, the Vescathi began to understand the nature of the beings that had answered their desperate call. Humans were strange in ways they could not fully describe. They did not seem fragile, even when working in the most dangerous conditions. They laughed in the middle of storms. They argued over small details, but never gave up. And most remarkably, they worked as if failure was never an option. For the Vescathi, this was almost unbelievable. Their own species had been forced to retreat, hide, and wait for the inevitable. They had known fear for so long that even hope had become a fragile memory. And now, humans had arrived not just as strangers, but as warriors of survival, carrying no weapons meant to conquer, only machines meant to protect and repair. The humans quickly assessed the hardest-hit colonies first. Entire regions of the Vescathi homeworld had become uninhabitable. Their cities half collapsed from the intense radiation storms. Houses that had stood for centuries were twisted into strange shapes. Roads were melted or warped, and bridges that had once spanned glowing rivers now hung broken over chasms. The humans moved through this destruction without hesitation. They carried compact machinery capable of repairing structures, building new protective shelters, and even cleaning radiation from critical areas. The Vescathi watched as humans climbed over debris, worked in areas that had been considered too dangerous for their own people, and carried out repairs that seemed impossible. To survive in this environment, humans wore thick suits and helmets, but even with that, the conditions were extreme. Radiation levels would have killed a Vescathi instantly, but humans did not flinch. They adapted. They improvised. They conquered fear with determination. One of the first humans the Vescathi observed was a technician who crawled through a collapsed building, adjusting a damaged generator. Sparks flew around him, and the heat was intense, yet he continued, careful but relentless. When asked why he risked so much, the human simply smiled and said, "Through the translator, someone has to do it. We didn't come this far to fail now." That simple answer stuck with the Vescathi. They had been waiting for someone to act, for someone to be brave enough to face impossible odds, and humans were exactly that. It was not strength or weapons that made them remarkable. It was courage, resilience, and the willingness to face danger head-on as humans worked. They also taught. They showed Vescathi engineers how to reinforce buildings with new materials, how to filter radiation from water and air, and how to design protective shelters that could withstand storms far worse than anything the Vescathi had ever faced. They explained these methods patiently, demonstrating first and allowing the Vescathi to try afterward. The humans were not interested in taking control. They wanted the Vescathi to survive on their own, to learn to fight back against the star's destructive forces. The Vescathi children were fascinated by the humans. They had never seen beings so strong, so fearless, yet so willing to help. The humans interacted with them gently, showing them how to build small protective devices and teaching them ways to avoid radiation hazards. Even in the midst of chaos, the humans found time to guide and encourage. For the first time in many cycles, the children laughed again, their voices bright against the eerie glow of a dying star. But it wasn't all easy. The humans faced setbacks, and they faced danger at every turn. Radiation spikes could strike without warning. Storms could collapse shelters while teams were inside, and machines often broke in the harsh environment. Yet every failure was met with action, not despair. They repaired what was broken, learned from mistakes, and pushed forward. The Vescathi had never seen such persistence. Where their own species might have paused, hesitated, or given up, humans simply adapted. The human medics were equally remarkable. They treated injuries with precision and speed. Radiation burns, cuts from collapsed structures, and exhaustion from forced evacuations were rampant among the Vescathi population. The humans used tools and techniques that seemed almost magical to the Vescathi, and they never stopped to rest until every patient was stable. What impressed the Vescathi most was the care humans showed. They treated every individual, no matter how small or insignificant the person might have seemed. Every life mattered. The humans also understood teamwork in a way the Vescathi had never experienced. Every task, from repairing machines to building shelters, was approached as a group effort. Humans communicated constantly, giving updates, warning each other of danger, and sharing ideas in real time. There was no hesitation born from fear or uncertainty. Every human knew that failure for one could mean failure for all, and they acted accordingly. The Vescathi began to mimic the humans' methods. They learned to improvise with the materials they had, to work through fear, and to trust each other in ways they had not before. Slowly, they regained hope. The humans had not just brought machines and skills. They had brought a lesson. Survival was possible if they acted together and did not give in to despair. As the humans moved further into the colonies, they discovered that not all Vescathi had survived the early storms. Entire cities had been wiped out, leaving only remnants of buildings and equipment. The humans did not flinch. They retrieved the injured, salvaged what they could, and began rebuilding immediately. They made temporary shelters out of scraps, rerouted power, and even planted temporary food supplies to sustain survivors. The humans were relentless, and their energy inspired the Vescathi to do more than they ever thought possible. The star's instability remained a constant threat. Radiation flares and storms erupted unpredictably, yet the humans moved as if they were part of the environment itself. They timed their movements carefully, monitored the energy spikes, and adapted their machines to function in conditions the Vescathi had thought impossible. Every human action seemed to say, "We can survive this. We will survive this." And they were not alone in spirit. The humans treated the Vescathi as equals, as partners in survival. They did not lecture or order. They suggested, demonstrated, and worked alongside them. The Vescathi began to feel empowered. The humans were not just saving them. They were teaching them to reclaim their home, to fight back against forces they had once thought unbeatable. Over several cycles, a visible transformation took place. Cities that had been abandoned were reinforced and repaired. Colonies that were considered lost were stabilized and habitable again. The humans' approach to problem-solving, combined with the Vescathi's own knowledge of the land, began to show results. Radiation shields worked better. Emergency shelters became safer. Water systems that had been destroyed were functioning again. For the first time in decades, survival seemed achievable. The humans also demonstrated incredible ingenuity. They used technology in creative ways, combining machines with natural elements. They built wind turbines capable of withstanding radiation storms, reinforced walls with local minerals, and created energy shields that could move with the storms. Every idea was tested immediately, adapted, and improved. Failure was only temporary, and the humans' patience and persistence were unending. The Vescathi were amazed, but also deeply moved. They realized that these humans were unlike any species they had ever encountered. They were strong, but more importantly, they were compassionate. They faced danger not for power or recognition, but because they believed in helping others. They worked tirelessly, endured hardship, and risked their own lives to save strangers. By the end of the first major cycle of repairs, the Vescathi population began to trust again. Fear was still present, but hope had returned. The humans had shown them that even in the face of a dying star, survival was possible. They had not come to rule, to conquer, or to exploit. They had come to act, to teach, and to protect. As night fell over the colonies, the humans gathered briefly to rest. Even in exhaustion, there was laughter, conversation, and planning for the next day. The Vescathi observed them quietly, realizing that survival was not just about machines or shields. It was about spirit, determination, and the refusal to give up. Humans carried all of these in abundance. For the first time in decades, the Vescathi dared to dream of a future in which their species could survive, thrive, and rebuild. They knew the star would remain a threat for cycles to come, but with humans by their side, they had a chance. They had learned that courage, adaptability, and teamwork could overcome even the most impossible odds. And somewhere deep within the human crews, there was no thought of reward or recognition. They were simply doing what humans had always done, facing danger head-on, helping those in need, and refusing to turn away when someone called for help. It was who they were, and it was exactly what the Vescathi needed to survive. The humans had been in the Vescathi system for many cycles now, and every day brought new challenges. The star's radiation storms were growing stronger, more unpredictable. Entire regions were still unstable, with cities half destroyed and colonies barely holding together. Yet the humans did not slow down. They moved with determination, adapting to every new danger the star created, and teaching the Vescathi to do the same. It became clear that survival would require more than fixing broken buildings or treating the injured. The humans had a way of looking at problems differently. Where the Vescathi saw limits, humans saw possibilities. They were not satisfied with temporary solutions. Every action had a long-term goal to make the colonies and cities strong enough to withstand anything the star might throw at them. The humans began designing massive shield generators to protect critical cities. They worked in teams, climbing over damaged structures and operating machines in conditions that would have killed any ordinary being. Radiation levels were extreme, yet humans moved as if they were immune. They coordinated like a single organism, each member knowing exactly what to do and when to do it. The Vescathi watched, amazed and bewildered. They had never seen beings thrive where others could not even survive a few hours. At the same time, humans began to repair transportation networks. Roads, bridges, and tunnels had been warped and melted by storms and radiation bursts. Humans used a combination of local materials and their own technology to rebuild them, often in ways that the Vescathi had never imagined. Bridges were reinforced with materials that could expand and contract without breaking. Roads could drain excess radiation and remain safe to walk or drive on. Even tunnels could withstand storms strong enough to flatten entire neighborhoods. What fascinated the Vescathi most was how humans worked with nature, not against it. They had studied the storms carefully and discovered ways to use them to their advantage. They built wind turbines that could power shelters and machines during the strongest storms. They harnessed solar energy even when the star's light was weak. They used the natural flow of the rivers and currents to distribute water and energy to the colonies. Every human invention seemed simple, yet brilliant, as if it had been designed for the chaos the Vescathi had long feared. The medics were equally remarkable. They treated injuries, infections, and radiation burns with techniques the Vescathi could barely understand. Humans worked side by side with Vescathi healers, teaching them how to build portable medical units, purify water, and grow emergency food supplies that could survive radiation and poor soil conditions. They never rushed their work, never cut corners, and never treated anyone as less important. Every life mattered. The humans also began to help the Vescathi organize their society for survival. They taught them how to divide labor efficiently, how to prioritize resources, and how to respond quickly to new disasters. For the first time in decades, the Vescathi felt a sense of control over their own fate. They had always been at the mercy of the star, but now, with humans guiding them, they could fight back. Children and families were brought into the process as well. Humans encouraged the Vescathi to participate in rebuilding efforts, showing them that even small contributions mattered. Children helped carry materials, assisted in planting radiation-resistant crops, and learned simple engineering techniques. Families repaired homes together, supported the shelters, and maintained communication lines. Humans emphasized that survival was a community effort, and everyone had a role to play. The star storms continued to rage, yet humans seemed unshaken. They developed mobile shield generators that could move ahead of storms to protect key areas. They set up emergency evacuation routes that allowed citizens to move quickly from one safe zone to another. They even built temporary shelters that could float above collapsing terrain or remain partially submerged in water when floods hit. Every solution was designed to save lives, and every life saved brought hope to a population that had almost given up. The Vescathi learned not just practical skills, but also mindset. They learned to face danger calmly, to adapt quickly, and to find solutions in the chaos. They began to think like humans, flexible, creative, and willing to take calculated risks. Slowly, they regained a sense of confidence that had been lost for generations. One of the most remarkable moments came when humans began working on a particularly dangerous colony. The region had been exposed to continuous radiation, with storms hitting every day. Vescathi engineers had deemed it impossible to repair. Yet humans arrived, setting up temporary shields and protective zones. They climbed over the broken city, repaired generators, and established communication networks. By the time the first storm hit, the colony was fully operational again. The Vescathi who had lived there were stunned. They had watched humans work in impossible conditions and survive. It was more than skill, it was courage. Humans also adapted to the Vescathi culture, learning their ways of communicating, respecting their traditions, and working alongside them without demanding obedience. They did not try to control the Vescathi or claim leadership. Instead, they acted as partners, offering knowledge, tools, and support. This approach built trust and strengthened the bonds between the two species. During this time, the humans shared small stories of their own home planet. They spoke of storms that destroyed entire cities, of rivers that could flood and swallow towns, of deserts that burned under the sun. The Vescathi realized that humans had survived extreme environments on their own world, and that experience had prepared them to face the worst conditions in the galaxy. Humans were not invincible, but they were incredibly resilient. They had learned to endure and adapt, and now they were passing that knowledge to the Vescathi. The Vescathi children began to imitate humans in small ways, building tiny shelters, practicing safety drills, and learning to handle emergency tools. Adults began to adopt human methods for planning, organizing, and responding to crises. Even the elderly, who had once felt powerless, started to contribute by sharing knowledge and helping in less physically demanding tasks. Humans had created not just a temporary solution, but a culture of survival. Through all of this, the star continued to burn dangerously, a constant reminder of the threat that still existed. Yet the Vescathi felt safer than they had in decades. They had learned that survival depended not only on technology, but on determination, teamwork, and adaptability. And humans embodied all of those qualities in abundance. The humans worked tirelessly, often without rest, but they never lost their focus. They celebrated small victories, like repairing a collapsed bridge or stabilizing a critical shelter. Every success, no matter how small, was a step toward survival. And they celebrated with the Vescathi, teaching them that hope could be cultivated even in the darkest times. As the cycles passed, entire regions of the Vescathi homeworld began to recover. Cities that had been abandoned were rebuilt, colonies became safe once more, and people could walk through streets that had been considered lost. Humans continued to push forward, solving problems that seemed impossible and inspiring the Vescathi to do the same. The humans also prepared for future threats. They built mobile disaster units that could respond anywhere, installed monitoring systems to predict radiation spikes, and trained Vescathi teams to act independently when humans were not present. Their goal was not just to save lives temporarily, but to ensure that the Vescathi could survive even after humans left. Through every action, humans showed a rare combination of courage, ingenuity, and empathy. They faced danger with confidence, solved problems with creativity, and treated every Vescathi individual with respect. They did not act as conquerors, teachers, or rulers. They acted as equals, partners in survival. By the end of this cycle, the Vescathi began to see a future they had never dared to imagine. They could survive the star's wrath. They could rebuild their cities, recover their colonies, and restore their society. And it was all because humans had arrived when no one else would. Humans had proven that survival was not just about technology or strength. It was about spirit. It was about refusing to give up, adapting to impossible circumstances, and helping others in need. They had brought hope, knowledge, and resilience to a species that had almost given up. And somewhere deep in the human crews, there was no thought of recognition or reward. They were already preparing for the next challenges, the next colonies, the next storms. Because humans did not save lives for praise. They saved lives because it was the right thing to do. And in doing so, they were teaching the Vescathi the most important lesson of all. No matter how hopeless things seem, courage, ingenuity, and teamwork can overcome even the deadliest threats. The humans had been working in the Vescathi system for many cycles, and their presence was beginning to change everything. The Vescathi, who had once felt helpless and abandoned, now looked at the galaxy in a new way. Humans had shown them that even in the face of impossible danger, survival was possible. But it wasn't just survival. Humans were teaching them how to thrive in a world that had once seemed doomed. News of the humans. Arrival spread quickly through the colonies and cities. Survivors shared stories of humans climbing through radiation storms, rebuilding broken machinery, and repairing shelters that had been considered beyond repair. They spoke of humans teaching the Vescathi how to improvise, how to adapt, and how to act with courage, even when the odds were stacked against them. Stories spread to other systems, where neighboring civilizations had ignored the Vescathi's desperate calls. Some were embarrassed, realizing that a species considered minor had now become the center of hope for an entire civilization. The humans, however, paid no attention to the politics of the galaxy. They focused only on the task at hand, helping the Vescathi survive. They moved tirelessly from colony to colony, stabilizing cities, repairing infrastructure, and teaching the Vescathi how to manage disaster themselves. Where a Vescathi city had once been overwhelmed by radiation storms, humans installed mobile shields that could protect entire neighborhoods. Where the water supply had been contaminated, they set up filtration units that could purify water even in extreme conditions. And where power grids had failed, humans devised solutions that used both local resources and their owned technology to restore energy to critical systems. The Viscathi began to notice something remarkable about these humans. They did not seem afraid. They faced radiation, collapsing buildings, and storms with determination and calm. Even when machines failed, humans did not panic. They improvised. They rebuilt. They continued working until the job was done. And they never left a task unfinished, even if it meant risking their own safety. Humans also brought a new perspective to problem solving. They looked at challenges not as obstacles, but as opportunities to find creative solutions. They combined their knowledge of technology with the Viscathi's understanding of their environment. They adapted old machines for new purposes, designed shelters that could withstand radiation storms, and trained Viscathi engineers to anticipate problems before they occurred. It was a partnership, and slowly, the Viscathi began to feel capable again. The most impressive part, perhaps, was how humans worked with the Viscathi themselves. They did not impose authority or demand obedience. They acted as equals, teaching and guiding rather than commanding. They encouraged the Viscathi to think independently, to try solutions on their own, and to learn from mistakes. This approach built trust. For the first time in generations, the Viscathi felt like they had allies they could count on, not just rescuers, who might leave when the work was too hard. Children and families were drawn into the effort as well. Humans made sure that even the youngest Viscathi could contribute safely. Children learned to build small shelters, repair tools, and prepare for storms. Families worked together to rebuild homes, maintain water systems, and care for the sick. Humans emphasized that survival was a community effort. Everyone had a role to play, and every contribution mattered. The star's instability remained a constant threat. Radiation bursts and storms were unpredictable and destructive. Entire colonies could be threatened in a single day. Yet humans remained calm. They built systems that could respond quickly to disasters, set up mobile shelters that could be moved before a storm arrived, and trained Viscathi teams to act independently if humans were not present. It was not just emergency response. It was a strategy for long-term survival. The Viscathi began to notice something else: the human spirit. They did not just survive, they inspired. Their courage and determination were contagious. Viscathi, engineers, healers, and citizens began to act with newfound confidence. They tried new methods, experimented with solutions, and faced dangers that would have terrified them before. The humans had changed not only their cities, but their mindset. They had shown that fear could be overcome by action, teamwork, and perseverance. At the same time, humans were careful to respect Viscathi culture. They learned local customs, listened to traditions, and worked alongside the population without imposing foreign ideas unnecessarily. They adapted their methods to fit the Viscathi way of life, which strengthened trust and cooperation. The Viscathi were amazed by this. Other species had once ignored them, or worse, judged them. Humans treated them as equals, valuing their knowledge, skills, and perspectives. One particularly dangerous task involved stabilizing a series of colonies on the planet's equatorial region. The storms there were constant, and radiation levels were dangerously high. Many Viscathi had long abandoned these colonies, believing them beyond saving. But humans saw potential. They designed mobile shields that could track storms, repaired critical infrastructure, and trained local engineers to manage emergencies. The process was slow and exhausting, but by the end of several cycles, the colonies were operational again. The Viscathi could hardly believe it. Places they had thought lost forever were now safe and habitable. Humans also created long-term strategies for survival. They developed early warning systems for storms, radiation shields that could be deployed quickly, and emergency shelters that could withstand even the most extreme conditions. They trained Vescathi teams to monitor these systems and respond independently. The goal was not only to save lives immediately, but to ensure that the Vescathi could protect themselves in the future. Humans were teaching self-reliance alongside survival. Through all of this, humans remained humble. They never claimed credit. They did not boast about their achievements or demand recognition. They celebrated victories quietly, often focusing on the next problem that needed solving. The Vescathi were struck by this. Humans were powerful, resourceful, and brave, yet they acted with empathy, patience, and humility. They showed that true strength was not just in skill or courage, but in how one treated others. By this point, the Vescathi had begun to trust the humans completely. They followed their guidance, adopted their methods, and participated in rebuilding efforts with enthusiasm. Communities that had been fragmented and fearful were now working together. Citizens shared knowledge, helped repair homes, and supported each other during storms. Children learned skills that would allow them to survive in the most dangerous conditions. Families were no longer paralyzed by fear. They were active participants in the recovery of their civilization. The humans had also begun documenting everything. They created guides on disaster management, engineering techniques, and emergency response. These manuals would remain even after the humans left, allowing the Vescathi to continue surviving on their own. The goal was not to create dependency, but to ensure that the Vescathi could thrive independently. Despite the progress, the star remained a constant threat. Radiation flares, storms, and energy surges continued to challenge the Vescathi. But humans had changed the way the species approached danger. They had taught them that even in the worst conditions, careful planning, teamwork, and creativity could overcome seemingly impossible challenges. By the end of this phase, the Vescathi were no longer a species waiting for rescue. They were a species learning to fight back. They had regained hope, skills, and confidence. They had learned that the universe might be dangerous, but it was not unbeatable. And they owed this transformation to the humans, who had arrived when everyone else had turned away. The humans had not come to rule. They had not come to conquer or demand obedience. They had come to help, to teach, and to inspire. They had faced unimaginable dangers, worked tirelessly, and shown the Vescathi that survival was possible. And in doing so, they had not only saved lives, they had restored hope, courage, and determination to a civilization that had once thought itself doomed. The Vescathi now understood that humans were not just strong or brave, they were extraordinary. In the way they faced the impossible with determination and empathy. They had arrived from a distant world, ignored by the galaxy, and yet they had changed everything. They had saved a species from extinction and had shown that the universe was not entirely cruel. And while humans did not seek praise or reward, their actions had already begun to reshape the galaxy's perception of what was possible. Where other species had abandoned the Vescathi, humans had acted. Where fear had once ruled, courage now guided the people. And the lessons humans had shared would live on, long after the storms had passed, teaching future generations that even the deadliest threats could be faced with determination, ingenuity, and cooperation. By the time the humans had completed their work in the Vescathi system, the transformation was clear. Cities that had been abandoned were alive again, with lights shining and streets filled with movement. Colonies that had been considered lost were now functional, their water systems clean, energy grids stable, and protective shelters in place. The Vescathi were no longer a species cowering in fear. They were a species learning to survive, rebuild, and thrive. The humans, however, did not linger unnecessarily. Their work was done, but they remained attentive, helping the Vescathi understand how to maintain the systems and respond to future dangers. Every shield, every filtration system, every emergency unit had been designed to be operated by Vescathi teams alone. Humans wanted to ensure that their arrival was not a temporary solution, but a lasting one. They had not come to take credit or control. They had come to empower. The Vescathi watched as humans packed up their equipment, prepared their ships, and organized for departure. There was a quiet sadness among the people. Humans had become more than rescuers. They had become teachers, friends, and symbols of hope. For decades, the Vescathi had felt the weight of the galaxy's indifference. They had believed that no one cared, that their suffering was invisible. And now, humans had shown them otherwise. Before leaving, the humans held one last gathering with the Vescathi. It was not ceremonial, nor was it formal. It was a simple meeting in the largest city that had been saved. Humans and Vescathi stood together, looking at the repaired buildings, the functioning streets, and the healthy people around them. The humans spoke in simple words through the translator, words that would stay with the Vescathi for generations. "We came because someone asked for help," one human said. "We stayed because someone deserved hope. We leave you with the knowledge, the tools, and the courage to survive. Protect your world. Protect your people. And if the day comes when someone else calls for help, answer them. Do not wait. Do not hesitate. Help them, as you have been helped." The Vescathi were deeply moved. Many had tears in their eyes. For so long, they had believed that the universe was cruel and indifferent. They had felt abandoned, helpless, and powerless. And now, humans had not only saved them, they had taught them the value of action, courage, and empathy. Humans had shown them that survival was not a matter of luck, but a matter of determination, ingenuity, and unity. Children ran forward, waving and trying to speak in the human language they had learned. Adults shook hands, touched the humans' armored suits in gratitude, and shared small gifts of local food and art. Even the elderly, who had once believed they would not survive the star's destruction, now smiled. The humans had given them something no one else had: hope. As the humans prepared to leave, the Vescathi leaders stepped forward. They spoke words of thanks, of gratitude, and of promise. "You have saved our species," one said. "Not just our lives, but our spirit. You have shown us what it means to survive when all seems lost. We will not forget this. We will not forget you." The humans simply nodded. They had no desire for recognition, no need for titles or reward. Their mission had been clear from the start: save lives and empower those who needed help. And in doing so, they had changed the course of a civilization. As the human ships lifted from the surface, the Vescathi watched in awe. From orbit, the human ships looked small against the backdrop of the star, yet they had achieved what no other civilization had dared to attempt. Entire colonies had been stabilized, cities rebuilt, and lives saved. And the humans had done it without weapons or domination, relying only on courage, skill, and determination. The Vescathi reflected on the lessons they had learned. They had seen fear and despair, but they had also seen bravery and hope. They had watched humans face dangers that the Vescathi themselves could not have survived. And they had learned that survival was not about waiting for rescue, but about taking action, adapting, and helping each other. In the cycles that followed the humans' departure, the Vescathi continued to rebuild. They applied the lessons learned from their visitors. Teamwork, ingenuity, and resilience became central to their society. Communities that had once been isolated began to work together. Engineers developed new technologies based on human designs. Medics improved emergency care using techniques taught by humans. Even children carried the lessons of survival into games and education, learning early that courage and cooperation could overcome fear. The humans' promise resonated deeply. If a species cried out for help, answer. The Vescathi now understood that the galaxy was not only full of danger, but also full of possibilities. And if they were ever called upon in the future, they would not hesitate. They had experienced firsthand the power of action, the value of courage, and the strength of unity. Years passed, and the Vescathi civilization began to thrive again. Cities shone with new energy, colonies expanded, and life returned to places that had been desolate. The lessons humans had left behind were not forgotten, they were practiced daily. Every emergency response, every rebuilding effort, every disaster plan carried the imprint of the humans' influence. Even as the Vescathi looked to the future, the memory of the humans remained vivid. They were no longer strangers from a distant world. They were symbols of hope, courage, and determination. Their arrival had proved that even in the darkest times, action mattered. That even when the universe seemed indifferent, individuals could make a difference. That even the most impossible challenges could be overcome with ingenuity, empathy, and teamwork. The Vescathi began to share their story with other civilizations. They spoke of the humans who had arrived when everyone else ignored their pleas. They told how a small, overlooked species had faced impossible danger to save lives, not for reward, but because it was the right thing to do. The tale spread, inspiring others across the galaxy. Where once fear and indifference had dominated, now hope and courage began to take root, and the humans, far away on their home planet, never expected recognition or reward. They returned to their world quietly, their mission complete, leaving behind a civilization transformed. Yet their impact could be felt everywhere. They had taught not just survival, but the meaning of empathy, courage, and perseverance. They had shown that true strength was not just in skill or power, but in helping others when it mattered most. The Vescathi, now strong and prepared, knew one truth above all. They had been saved not just by machines, technology, or plans, but by beings who believed in helping, who refused to turn away, who faced danger without hesitation. Humanity had reminded them that hope was possible, even in the most desperate circumstances. And so, the Vescathi looked to the stars with renewed confidence. They were no longer victims of fate. They were survivors, empowered, resilient, and ready to face whatever challenges might come. And somewhere across the galaxy, far beyond their system, humans had quietly ensured that the Vescathi's future would be bright, safe, and full of hope. Because when the universe turns its back, it only takes a few who dare to act, to listen, and to help to change everything. Humans had done that. They had listened. They had acted. They had saved a civilization. And they had left behind a promise that kindness, courage, and determination could endure across time and space, shaping the future of an entire species. For the Vescathi, this was not just survival. It was a rebirth. And it all began because humans, the Deathworlders, had arrived when no one else would.